Hi everyone, this is Daniel Crawford here, and this is Bell to Bell, obviously my YouTube show about professional wrestling. So, February 1st here, this installment, we had an incredible week of wrestling from January, 24th through, I'll just say the 31st. I'll include the Royal Rumble in this assessment here. And there's a lot to talk about with this past week. But either way, let me get started here in review of the last whole week of professional wrestling for January, including last night's, Royal Rumble. So, top 5 matches of the week from January 24th through the 31st. Actually an 8-day span of time. I always include pay-per-views like this, so just bear with me if you haven't seen an episode before. This is just my approach to it. So, top 5 matches. Remember, this is in no particular order, but it might as well be. I just want to say Royal Rumble, both the men's and women's. Those are 2 of the top 5 slots. Both of those matches were great for their own reason. The men's Rumble, so many memorable moments. Like, Rumbles are always like this, and this year's was no exception. And I saw some comments on Twitter about how WWE really went above and beyond to make the best of a pay-per-view that is always best in front of a crowd of people. But even with that, they gave us one of the top Royal Rumbles in history. I thought it was going to be almost impossible to top last year's Royal Rumble, but it looks like WWE has at least made this one comparable to last year's Royal Rumble. Like, it was so good, and the men's was especially good. Like, I marked out when I saw Carlito show up. That was awesome. I know for years, especially since I've been watching again, I've seen people constantly saying, like, we want Carlito back. You know, Carlito was always hard to get back in there. Well, they got him, and it was great. Went around giving everyone backstabbers. It was awesome just to see him in the ring. And he's in such good shape. Looks like he could actually return to action. And something told me, when we didn't see Carlito at the Legends Raw, something told me they're saving him for the Royal Rumble. And guess what? They did, and I am so grateful for it. It was better than if he had been in Legends Raw. It was just a lot better. So, we had that, and then we had the Women's Royal Rumble. Actually, no, I want to mention one more thing. Obviously, the big news about the Men's Royal Rumble, other than Edge winning, was Christian returning. As of last summer, he was not cleared for action. And here he is, back in the ring. And that moment, when Edge sees Christian, and then Christian and Edge get in the ring, it was emotional. It was mostly emotional for me because I was sitting next to my brother, who was always a big Edge and Christian fan. It was his favorite tag team. And Edge was his favorite wrestler after Shawn Michaels. But Edge, like, when Edge retired, Michael was heartbroken. My brother Michael was. And when he saw Christian come up, like, he was already emotional last year when he heard that Edge had returned, because he hasn't watched wrestling for a solid show in years, in a long time. But I had him over to watch the Royal Rumble, and then he saw Christian, which was, I never expected Christian to come back. He was already happy to see Edge in there, but when he saw Christian, like, he almost cried. I know he did. Like, I could see the look on his face, looked like he was a child all over again. That was an emotional moment. That's what these events are for. That's why I love the Royal Rumble. The Women's Royal Rumble was also pretty good. Now, of course, the men's, I think, was better this year. And the icing on top of the cake was, the Royal Rumble match was the only match on the pay-per-view that I did not accurately predict. I thought Sheamus was going to win the Rumble, and then they turned around and made Edge the winner. And I thought, yeah, that's great. You know, I love that. That's the amazing thing that's, like my best friend told me, that's money. My best friend Jeff, who used to be in the podcast with me for Wrestling Today, it's money. To have Edge competing for the world title at WrestleMania, especially since WrestleMania will be the first WWE event with a crowd. It'll be a limited attendance. It'll be the first WWE event since, the NXT before the pandemic ruined everything. It'll be the first event with a crowd of any sort in WWE since that. So, you know, take that into consideration. Interesting historical note. The last event of WWE that had a crowd was NXT, when NXT took place in the Performance Center. And that was a really good event, but that was the last time WWE had a crowd. It was actually, I think it was to have a crowd, AEW had a crowd that same night. So, either way, it was the last WWE event to have a crowd. It was in the Performance Center, which was interesting because that's where they would have to have most of their events for a while, was in the Performance Center. So, Women's Rumble was also really fun to watch. My favorite moment, like I predicted Bianca would win, and it's very well deserved. But my favorite moment of the Women's Rumble was seeing Victoria come in. Victoria was my favorite women's wrestler for a while. I was heartbroken that Molly Holly did not come in there. Molly Holly, I love her to death. She's my favorite women's wrestler of all time, even beating Alexa Bliss, which I love Alexa, and I'll comment about that in a second. But Victoria being in there, awesome. Like it made me jump for joy. Like, yes, Victoria. Like, I haven't seen her in the ring in a while, and she's a really down to earth person. From what I've seen in my interaction, like slight interaction with her online, very enjoyable. I absolutely love that. And Molly Holly once again broke my heart because she didn't come in. She was in the first 3 women's Royal Rumble, so that was pretty awesome. But it seemed like maybe there was a conflict of schedule. Like, there's no other reason I could think of for Molly Holly not to be in there. Like, I love Molly Holly. Anyways, Alexa Bliss, my favorite current active women's wrestler. She, of course, seems to have a limited schedule because her matches are never really that physical, and I think she's just being careful. I do love seeing her in the ring, but she wasn't in the Rumble that long because she was in the middle of a transformation, and I think they were just wanting to interrupt her from that and like interrupt like a continuous match because I think that may have been too difficult to do. But as she was trying to do a transformation, you saw Rhea Ripley just throw her out, which was okay. It was pretty good, and I loved I loved Alexa, and I think she's probably going to become Raw Women's Champion in the very near future. Although maybe not too soon, because I think Charlotte and Asuka are headed for a rematch, and that is a lot more likely with Asuka and Charlotte having lost their women's tag titles at the beginning of the show. Anyways, next on this list was the last man standing match with Roman Reigns defending against Kevin Owens. A great match. The 2 craziest spots involved Kevin Owens being just completely murdered by the golf cart going through the window, which I jumped for joy on that. And it reminded me, as wrestlers and fans of AEW pointed out, it reminded me of when Sammy Guevara was hit by the golf cart on Dynamite about a year ago. And that was also equally funny. I mean, that was actually funny, whereas this was like, it looked really good. But people kept replaying that image of Sammy Guevara being chased by the golf cart and being hit by it. So that was all good. And then, of course, Kevin Owens did like a crazy swanton bomb off of a freaking lift, from the pallet that was on the forklift. Did that, went through a table, mostly just exploded his ass while doing that. And then, it was a really good match. The only part that sucked was that they slightly botched the finish because the handcuffs were done like in a weird position. And Owens like handcuffed Roman Reigns underneath like part of the stage, and they had a hard time getting the handcuffs off of him, so it kind of delayed the finish a little bit. And I think Roman was trying to like break the handcuffs, but the position where he was at made it impossible to do that. So he opted to like throw the ref at a light, knocked him out. But then the next ref came in like a little bit too soon, so it hurt the finish a little bit. And Owens was just kind of like standing there watching, and the finish was a little bit botched, but the match was still good, and it had an ending that made sense, although they had to stretch it a little bit. Only thing that almost ruined my rating for that match, but I still gave it a 10 because I respect all the other hard work and effort in there. Just sucks that they had that the finish was botched. Like wrestlers in the future, when you have a spot where you're handcuffed or something like that, where the camera can't see the handcuffs, just fake that you're handcuffed. Just act like you're handcuffed. Don't take this risk anymore. Let me see. Next, 10-man tag on SmackDown is one of my top 5. I thought, it started out as a match between AJ and Daniel Bryan. I didn't like the finish of that at first because Sami Zayn came in and interfered. But then they kept upping the ante. They kept adding people to the match. So they went from a singles match between AJ and Daniel Bryan to a 6-man tag. Then that one had a false finish and because it had a disqualification finish. And then it became a 10-man tag. Of course, it was like 5 versus 4. Then Sheamus came down. And they gave Sheamus like a really good ending for the show. And, Sheamus and his team won. It was just a good match. It was fun. Like, if you put it all together in one match, it was a really good segment to finish off SmackDown. So kudos to them on having a really good SmackDown this week. Dax Harwood and Jungle Boy. Really good match. One of my top 5, obviously. So I had to put this in the top 5 because it just stood above and beyond a lot of the others. For once, NXT didn't have one of the top 5 matches, and it usually does, and AEW was in there. So kudos to AEW on a really solid show. I'll get more into that in a second. Honorable mentions to the match. Well, there was a gauntlet match on Raw. Riddle had to go up against pretty much every member except for Bobby Lashley of the Hurt Business. Now, this was one of the things about Royal Rumble that kind of threw me off a little bit, is because Riddle was supposed to challenge Bobby Lashley for the U.S. Championship, and I thought it was supposed to be at Royal Rumble. Maybe it's for Raw, but Riddle, he defeated Shelton Benjamin, and then he defeated Cedric Alexander. The match with Shelton Benjamin was pretty good, but then you had the Cedric Alexander one, which was also really good. So kudos to them, a really good match. Another honorable mention to the main event between Asuka and Alexa for the Raw Women's Championship. This, of course, ended in a disqualification when Randy Orton did an RKO on Alexa. But, I love this story that Alexa's telling. And she's not bad in the ring. She's just really good at storytelling. So this is what helps her to stay relevant and to be above and beyond like the rest of the women's division, in my view. Like, she's the one I'm most invested in. And it's not just because she's gorgeous looking, but it's also, she is slightly talented. I can't say slightly. She also is talented in the ring. Granted, not as good as like Charlotte and Sasha and Becky and them. But she is great at telling a story. But her promo work is the best in the industry, I think. So, anyways, moving on. The best backstage involved Alexa. Her playground segment. Where she's just like demented, obsessing over Asuka, talking about how she misses The Fiend. Like, it's all good stuff, So I'm definitely looking forward to how they transform The Fiend. So, all great stuff. Definitely love that segment. Best show of the week. So we had 5 excellent shows this week. Raw, AEW, NXT, SmackDown, and Royal Rumble. They were all excellent. So the best show, though, it comes down to this. Raw, I gave a 9.58 to. And AEW got a 9.83, one of its highest ratings for me ever. Just a really good show of AEW this week. NXT, 9.89. Excellent show. SmackDown, another great show, 9.78. And then Royal Rumble was a 9.5. Royal Rumble would have been the best show of the week. It would have been a perfect 10 if it wasn't for that stupid Bad Bunny performance. I gave a 0 to that. Like, I couldn't stand it. It was an awful segment. I hated it, and it ruined the rating overall for Royal Rumble. And I almost excluded it because it wasn't part of the story, but then they included Bad Bunny in the story, so it's like, oh crap. So I had to include the segment. Anyways, Royal Rumble had the worst rating, but it wasn't an awful show. It was a great Royal Rumble, except for that one segment. So it came in last. Obviously, Raw was right above it. It wasn't an awful show itself, but it came right above it. SmackDown was number 4. Not SmackDown was number 4, but SmackDown was number 3, so in the middle rating. The second best show of the week was AEW, and NXT just barely edged it out. So solid wrestling this week. NXT was the best show of the week. Just great wrestling. Best heel moment of the week. This was a little bit tough for me to decide, but mostly because the heels didn't have a really outstanding week. It was more about the fan favorites for once. This whole week was. So Mustafa Ali, his promo in the back, aimed at Ricochet and others and the Legends, was a really good segment. So I thought that deserved to be the best heel moment of the week. That was all on Raw. Fire story of the week. Two fire stories. So Owens and Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens and Roman Reigns just continue to steal the show. Best story of the week by far, I think. But I think a close second, which deserves an honorable mention itself, is Edge in his return. Along with Christian. Great. Which also brings me to the new stars. They're not really new stars, but I had to put 3 in here. And that was the returns to the ring in the Royal Rumble of Christian, Carlito, and Victoria. I can't mention enough how much I enjoyed each one of those. Carlito and Christian were like the big... Actually, no, all 3 of them were really big surprises. Almost equal. But most emotional was Christian, so that was great. Best promo of the week was Edge on Raw announcing his return and entry into the Royal Rumble, saying he's going to pursue and try and get back what he never lost. Amazing. And it almost made me predict Edge was going to win the Royal Rumble, but I didn't think he would because this was his first time back since the summer, and I thought, the Daniel Bryan story or Sheamus were going to overlap that. But no, they gave Edge the win, so pretty cool. Favorite commentary moment of the week as we wrap up here. Samoa Joe on Raw when he said about Almas, I think that's his name. I always say it goes between Almas or Omos. Anyways, the big guy right beside AJ Styles. So AJ Styles is walking out with Omos, and Samoa Joe says, I wonder if there is a fee for walking around with a skyscraper. So it was pretty much the only standout commentary moment of the week, but it was still good, so it was funny. This week in wrestling history, interesting. February 1st, 1997, ECW announced their pay-per-view debut, Barely Legal, which of course took place in April of 97. Great stuff. And finally, as we conclude, please check out the podcast, Wrestling Today Extra Extra. You can find it on Spreaker and other venues. And then, of course, my website, DanielCrawford.org, where you can see all my other projects. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time.